We're here today at Eubanks Memorial Cemetery. Now, this is a family cemetery that's been here since the middle 1800s. The oldest marked grave here is from 1855. That would be Elizabeth Eubanks. When we get to her gravesite over there, we'll talk about her and her family a little bit and how my family got to actually use this cemetery. I've got 7 generations of family that's buried down here, starting with a daughter, going back to a great, great, great grandmother. So I'm going to start over here. We're not going to go through all the graves here today. We may do that at another point in time, but today we're just going to go through the basic 7 generations that I'm talking about with my family. And then we'll go to the older part of the cemetery, which is located over in that direction. And we'll also show you a colored cemetery that's in the back corner that was in disrepair for a lot of years. And a couple of years ago, the cemetery was expanded westward over there, and it took in part of the, or actually all of the colored cemetery that we know of back there. So let's get started with this. First off, I'm just a novice at this. I am not a professional by no means. I do this for my enjoyment and to pass on to posterity. Now, right here is my daughter, Heather Nicole Davis. She was born and died in 1977. She only lived a matter of just a few hours, maybe 6 hours, 8 hours, something like that, or whatever. It was devastating for me at the time. I was 20 years old, and if you don't think that's devastating on a 20-year-old man to lose a child, boy, I tell you, you got another thing coming. It really affected me probably more in a negative way than it did a positive way. And if you don't, if you've never experienced, you just have no idea of how it is. Uh, anyway, she didn't have much of a life, and this is kind of a tribute to her and my grandfather out here, who actually is the reason I got into genealogy. Now, this is my brother Lynn Milton Davis. He actually just passed away a month and a half, 2 months ago now. Lynn was a good man. I loved him. We got along very well. We had our ups and downs at times or whatever, but he was a good brother and I loved him to death. And we took care of each other. Lynn was a painter and a carpenter and loved to play his guitar. I don't know that he ever picked up any instrument with strings on it that he couldn't play. He was just a natural. He couldn't read or write music in the classical sense of sitting down with a pen and paper and writing it, but he could knock out a tune or mimic anything out there. He had a couple of bands at different times or whatever, but they never really amounted to anything. He played for the love of music. Avid hunter. Uh, he could see a deer out in the woods where nobody else could see one, and he killed a lot of deer in his lifetime. I'll tell you, he was. I don't know whether it was luck or skill, probably a little bit of both, but he was a hunter. Uh, that would be the second generation, the first and second generation. Now, the third generation would be my mother's generation, and my mother's still alive. So, but she had three sisters. This would be the next oldest to her, Barbara Davidson Redfern. And she was born in 35 and died in 91. But this would be my mother's generation. Now, my Aunt Jean Davidson Schifferdeck is buried here. Now, she just passed away. June was a year ago. And they've ordered the marker, but with the COVID thing and all like that going on or whatever, apparently there's a backlog of I don't know how long of getting her a marker down here. Her third sister was my Aunt Judy Davidson Courtney. Her and her husband are buried down here. Uncle Ted and their daughter Trina. Their daughter Trina died of what they call SIDS now. Back when she passed away, they actually called it crib death. So that's my mother's generation down there. The third generation is buried down here. Now we come to the fourth generation that's buried down here. This is my grandfather, James Walter Davidson. Now, Grandpa was a Baptist preacher, preached for a long time, and he preached the Bible. He didn't go for a lot of frills. When he got up on Sunday morning and preached a sermon, it come from his heart. Wasn't no pre-made sermon or anything like that or whatever. It's what God had inspired him to talk about on any given day. He inspired me to get into genealogy, and which led me to do what I'm doing here today. I used to stay at their house a lot. He practically raised me. My parents would have to come and kidnap me. I'd go to sleep at Grandma and Grandpa's house, and they'd have to come kidnap me in the middle of the night just to take me home. Now, this is my Grandma Eva Green. She was something else. She was straightforward about everything. You did not have to think twice when my grandmother said something. She was a quiet woman and she didn't say much, but when she said something, she expected you to understand it and act accordingly. Now, she was a Green. Her daddy was a Sawyer. And a Sawyer was somebody that actually started and maintained sawmills. And my great-grandpa Jack Green, he done that all over the South, mainly South Georgia and North Florida here. But he done a lot of work down in South Florida too. A lot of people think about the South as being cotton. Well, I'll tell you, here in Florida, it was all about pine lumber, buddy. And actually, when my grandmother was young, they were down in South Florida for a while, and she actually got the chance to meet Babe Ruth, who took her and her younger brother, my Uncle J.D., out for ice cream. She also met Thomas Edison while they were down there. There's a book in my grandma somewhere. I'm just not the man that's talented enough to write it. So anyway, that would be the next generation on this ladder. Now, over here we've got my great-grandparents. Now, my great-grandparents were farmers. They lived off the land. They had 11 children that they raised off of 40 acres that you could almost throw a rock and hit their old homestead from this place. Forrest Wilson Davidson, he was born in 1888 and died in 1963. I was very young, about 5 years old when he passed away, but I remember it well when he did pass away. Very few times did you not see my great-grandfather in overalls. And that's pretty much all he wore. Now, his daddy was a Scotsman, a merchant seaman. He was actually a carpenter on the ships. And he come snooping around, up around Trader's Hill up in Georgia up there. And he met my great-great-grandmother, Polly Ann Tanner, married her. They had a child and it passed away at birth. Then a few years later, they had my great-grandfather here. Now, I'm actually named after him. I catch my middle name from him. My middle name is Forrest. I got my first name from one great-grandfather, my middle name from another great-grandfather. Now, to continue the generational thing, his wife, Julia Ann Davidson, she was a Williams. She was born in 1896 and died in 1986. She was 90 years old. Good Christian woman. Loved to go to the mountains. My grandparents went to the mountains quite a bit. And anytime they went, great mother went with them. Now, we called her great mother, and my great grandpa, we called him great father. But she was a Williams, and there was a lot of Williamses out here on the north side. Now, we're out on the north side of Duval County, up near the Nassau County line, not too far. And all this area up here was homesteaded by a lot of Florida pioneers. And like I say, these people here scratched a living out of the dirt here in North Florida. And they were poor. They didn't have a lot. Now, the Davidson family with 11 children had a lot of children. And so I've got a rather large extended family. Now, that was the 5th generation that I've got buried down here at the cemetery. Now, over here, we come to the 6th generation, and that would be my great-grandpa, great-great-grandpa, Walter Williams. Now, he was born in 1871, died in 1951. Here again, Grandpa Walter was a farmer, and he had around 10 kids or so. Now, Grandpa Walter was married quite a few times, 5 or 6 that I know of. And like I say, he's another one that had a lot of children, but once again, a farmer. Now, the Williams family was a big family. A lot of them were down around Cedar Point, and a lot of them down around the end of Sterrett Road, down to what they call Shady Rest down there. Now, his mother, Lydia Williams, is buried over here. She was born in 1854 and died in 1924. Now, Grandma Lydia was married to John H. Williams. She was a Wingate. And there's quite a few of the Wingate family that's buried down here. But she was here again, member of a farm family. And part of the Florida pioneers that was down here in this part of the country. Now, she completes the 7 generations that I've got buried down here. Now, I've got cousins, uncles, aunts, and you name it buried down here. Most of them are buried in the Davidson part of the cemetery over there. Now, over here, we're getting to the older part of the cemetery. Now, the oldest grave that I know of in here, this marked, I'm sure there's unmarked burials out here, was Elizabeth Eubanks. Now, the Eubankses were an average family, but back in the day, they'd have been rich compared to a lot of the families down here. And it wasn't that they was rich with money, they were rich with land. Now, Elizabeth Eubanks died in 1855. Now, she was born 17, trying to remember the date, probably around 1760, 1770, somewhere in that area. Now, Elizabeth was a Broward. Now, the Browards owned a lot of North Duval County out here. Anything north of the river, the Broward family owned. They had one of the original Spanish land grants down here. And some of the Browards were actually into politics, and Napoleon Bonaparte Broward was actually one of the governors here in Florida. But anyway, they got their land. She was married to William Eubanks, but she inherited 300 acres down here, which become the Eubanks family farm. Now, her grandson, Hollie Eubanks, Hollie, that was his nickname, is the one that told my great-grandfather that he could use part of this cemetery in perpetuity to bury his family in. And over the years, there was a struggle back and forth about people being buried down here and one thing and another, but they finally straightened it all out a while back, and I'm glad they did. Anyway, they give us our own part of the cemetery back over there, and we're happy for it. But I'll tell you, burying somebody today is not cheap. My aunt that passed away a while back, or whatever, it cost over $12,000 for a very simple funeral. Now, back here in this corner back here was what I was telling you about earlier. There was several families of African American people that lived right down the road here in Tysonia. All this was known as Tysonia, but Tysonia up the road up here or whatever was where the railroad stop was. And that's how a lot of communities were defined. Right down the road, we've got Duval Station. That was another train stop. But 20 years ago, all this here was grown up so much. There's a lot of shadows here. But this area right here looked just like that over there. Me and my brother and my nephew come out here, well, actually before that, and it was hard to see any of this, and we didn't get too close to any of it because we was afraid we might step in an old grave. But I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's at least 8 burials out here, and probably more than that. Now there's 3 or 4 that's just the vaults here. There's no markers of any kind. There's one here that had a marker at one time, and it looks like it may have been a cross where the wings of the cross have been knocked off at some point in time. This is a grave fence that was, I'm just guessing here, or whatever, by the way it's made, that this was probably made in the 1930s, maybe the 1940s. And it's rusting and part of it's missing or whatever, but somebody's buried down there. I don't know who it is, or probably nobody else knows who it is that's alive today. But there's 2 back here on the back that you can actually find out something about. Now this is a homemade marker back here. This ain't no store-bought marker. Somebody took a lot of time making this. Now, I don't know whether y'all can read this or not, but I think it says Biddle Brown. Could be Milton Brown. Born April 5th, 1872. Died January 25th, 1931. So that was right during the beginning of the Depression. So ain't nobody had no money back then, I'll tell you. So everything was kind of handmade, and people just done the best they could. Now, this one's marked on the other side here. This one actually was done out of a piece of, looks like maybe sandstone. And this one actually was carved. This is G.G. Brown, 1867 to 1959. So it was a lot better times when this headstone was made. Now, that's an old stump root that's got bamboo growing out of it. Down here, you don't find a whole lot of bamboo, so somebody planted that bamboo here. It's not a natural occurring bush. Now, we just had Hurricane Nicole come through here a few days ago, and it's not too bad down here. There's a little bit of stuff on the ground, but it's not as bad as I was expecting it to be. Now, this is Eubanks Cemetery, and it was also known as Dee's Landing Cemetery, and the reason it was called Dee's Landing Cemetery is because if you look down through here, which is probably about the most open spot, the creek runs back there, and to the west, which is your left, goes back towards Nassau River, and to the right, it goes back up towards, if I'm not mistaken, Clapboard Creek. Pretty good ways down there, but I believe it eventually makes its way into Clapboard Creek. So that's about it. Like I say, I could go to all the headstones down here, but it would take a long time. There's about 300 graves down here. Now, like I was saying earlier, cattle and lumber was the big thing. In fact, my grandfather was a Florida cowboy at about 14 years of age. He left home and was a Florida cowboy. And to show you just how important that cows were, Tenny Eubanks had a cow on her headstone. It's a little unusual to have a cow on your headstone, and that's a pretty well made one. Anyway, I'm going to wind this video up with that. Like I said, I'm just new to this, not a professional. Like I say, I'm in it for my own personal enjoyment. If anything becomes of it, that's fine. If it don't, that's fine too. But I would like for you to like and subscribe, and maybe put some comments down in the comment section. We're going to go visit the Connor Green Cemetery at some point in time. Green family's got a very colorful history, and they were Florida pioneers as well. Like I say, if you've got any suggestions, if anybody wants me to go somewhere special that's close, I'd be more than glad we do it. And I appreciate y'all spending your time with me today. And with that being said, God bless you, and y'all have a good one.